Greetings from the southern parts of Africa. My name is Lindo Rosa Manjoli, and I'd like to welcome you to a new YouTube channel. A YouTube channel that's going to deal with a lot of things that affect the youth, affect young people, and affect South Africa, Africa, and the globe quite a lot. The principle of this show is to be able to bring conversation. We think COVID-19 has put us apart, has made people isolate, and I think sometimes thinking is such a communal thing. It's such a sense of community, and we think together when we are together. So what we're trying to do with this YouTube channel is to be able to think together with each other so we can engage. So we'd like you to like, comment, share, subscribe, do all of those things so we can get more people into the conversation. So today, in this show called Reality with Rosa, we really want to be able to look at an organization, or in fact a movement and a moment historically in South Africa that has affected the way in which we think and view the relationship or the relations between state and civil society in South Africa. And what we want to do here is to be able to do an honest reflection on the UWC FeesMustFall moment. I call it a moment because I think it was a historical gift to motive and progressive forces of revolution in South Africa. Maybe a gift that we could have used in another way. But speaking of which, it is important for me to bring someone who's very critical to this engagement, someone who's very understanding of the internal dynamics of this engagement and even broader. And what we're going to do upon reflection, I thought that I was going to have one component, one segment to discuss FeesMustFall, discuss the recent revelations in the Zondo Commission that spoke about the penetration and the surveillance and the spying on the FeesMustFall movement by state security agencies. And we thought, while that is very important, we really decided that if you do not speak a language, it starts to die. And we started to realize that if we do not speak enough about FeesMustFall as a historical important moment, and if we do not read enough about it, write enough about it, start these engagements about it, it will start dying as a significant historical moment. So today I have, in the first part of a series of discussions on FeesMustFall, I have the former president of the University of the Western Cape, SRC, a very good friend of mine, Msingathi Kula.
Yeah, man.
How's it feel?
No, we're good. Thank you for welcoming us. Yeah, well, where do we start?
Difficult. No, thanks for being here, leadership. Thanks for being here with us. Like we said, we're going to have a conversation. And again, please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're going to give you a couple of questions at the end of the show where we'd like you to ask us questions, engage us, and perhaps offer some advice on what you think we should tackle next. What's going to happen is that MC and I are going to be together for the next couple of shows that we're going to drop. We're going to bring in a diverse group of panelists to be able to discuss the movement, the internal dynamics of the movement, the ideological composition and perhaps dynamics of the movement, the black radical feminist injection within the movement, and how these ideas have shaped a sort of new kind of thinking. But to speak of that, we must really start to understand, to situate FeesMustFall historically. How do you think we came to the point where we had FeesMustFall and how it came about?
For myself, actually, Fees, I think how it became, it was a culminative process of events, not actually events, but struggles. Students have always, I think particularly us who come from so-called previously disadvantaged institutions, which mostly in this case, they're still disadvantaged. So, for example, you would say WUSU, in that particular year, 2015, they had not been on campus for a good couple of months, until April or March. Sure. So that is FeesMustFall for us. So for us, people who've been marching to Parliament for years, and I think, of course, we understood that young people across the country, institutions of higher learning were saying that fees have to fall. Free education has to come. And how was that going to come? We had to take up arms, we had to revolt against the government, and that is what actually happened. It trickled down to each and every institution. But for ourselves at UWC, I think, like I said before, we were always engaged in student politics and student movement. So I think that for us, it was not a matter of science for us to engage in FeesMustFall, because it was something that became natural. As revolutionaries, we knew that this is our responsibility. So that's how we found actually ourselves within fees. Just so to also note, because at that time we're not even active in student politics anymore. We had taken a voluntary, retirement, an early retirement. So
Yeah, true. I think you're very right, and like you say, importantly is that for people out there watching, the viewers, we do come from two different political orientations. From the mass democratic movement, Msingathi and myself, from the Pan-Africanist movement within South Africa. So it's FeesMustFall was beautiful in the sense that it brought together different schools of thought. But I don't think that FeesMustFall was the first time that happened, because if I recall, at UWC in particular, whenever there was a protest, if it's NSFAS, if it's the nursing students with their clinical hours struggles, if anything, if COVAX, for that matter, so SASCO, PASMA, and whoever other organization that was there on campus, even DASO for that matter, we always, took up struggles, at the same level. So there was always an understanding that in order for you to be able to punch a hole into the hegemony of university management, you needed to be able to unite. And just looking historically at things like, or moments like 1976, which resonated quite, largely with sort of the language within FeesMustFall, and looking at how FeesMustFall started, and how FeesMustFall culminated into FeesMustFall, it was really, what would you say that FeesMustFall was an intellectual moment or intellectual portrayal of the students' energy in South Africa at the time?
But I think also it definitely is, because I come from the school of thought that says before you become, you are community members before we're students. So in this sense, our intellectual understanding of what a student is in the context of the communities, that most of us come from working class communities, whereby we're the first generations that goes to institutions of higher learning. So when you come back, when you come back with that knowledge, you are more advanced in terms of knowledge production, articulation, and whatnot. So within Fees, in fact, let me start with roles, because we were part of FeesMustFall as well. What you found there was that deep discussion, ideological discussions were happening, debates were happening from all kinds of different school of thoughts. You had Marxists, you had everyone there, you had feminists, and sometimes you had different sharp, different views.
Contradiction.
Sharp contradiction, in a sense that we came from different school of thoughts, ideologically, different political organizations. So even with Fees, the same culture trickled down to Fees. In Fees, you had SASCO, you had PASMA predominantly. PASMA was predominant, particularly to WC and security. You had some of us who come, myself, the Youth League, so actually everyone else, but within that, discussions every day, because we had to account, we had to debate, whatever you said, you had to intellectualize it and contextualize it, because here you're dealing with students, people who are advanced in their knowledge. So whatever you say, you're going to be taken to task. Well, what do you actually mean? Explain to us, we do not understand. So it was an intellectual moment, because also there were academics who were also part of it, So the discussions were at that level. That's for me was also very important.
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. And I think another part of the intellectual fiber and perhaps of FeesMustFall was that students stood up to the hegemony of the state. And I remember in our personal reflections on WhatsApp, when you spoke to me about, sort of the power of the state, and the state, sort of wringing our necks, sort of as an albatross on our neck, and our neck being our freedom at the time. FeesMustFall was sort of not only speaking about student debt at UWC or CPT or UCT at the time, but it was speaking for the broader oppressed and marginalized people in South Africa to say that there is something wrong about our political subjectivity in South Africa as we know it right now. There is something wrong about our relationship with the powers that be in terms of the constitution is incongruent with the realities of South African justice. And therefore, FeesMustFall then started to say, no, but, and I remember that there's that poster where we were marching to Parliament. It writes the section on higher education.
Section 29, yeah.
On higher education. Yeah. And that is such a beautiful picture, like they say, pictures tell 1,000 words. A beautiful picture that says, FeesMustFall culminates out of a constitutional promise.
Sure.
It does not culminate out of something, purely revolutionary, just students wanting to, just be problematic. It culminates out of the promise that the constitution, the liberal democratic framework that you understand to be a way or a social organization in South Africa, it comes from that. And I think that is where it came from. And the injection, I don't know what you think, but the injection of the inspiration that we got from the Marikana miners, in terms of how diligent and how sacrificial, the magnitude of their sacrifice to stay in that mine, and not mine and strike for 6 months at the detriment of their families. It was something that really inspired us whenever we thought, but we need to go to class, chief. We need to now, we really had these conversations. So, speaking of that as an intellectual response, yes, FeesMustFall is not something that was new. People have been thinking, have thought even sharper than FeesMustFall in the past. But I think it was a historical moment that was given to us. What would you say are the most key personal reflections that you can have about, the movement at UWC in particular? Like, what?
I think for me, one of the things when we speak first about 1976, 1976 was a moment whereby young people, secondary school, said they are tired of the system imposing Afrikaans to them. 40 years later, or a couple of 3 decades later on, university students say we are tired of paying because we do not, firstly, we are the most oppressed, we do not have money. Yes, we acknowledge that, there's NSFAS, but we understood intellectually that NSFAS is actually a loan. One of the slogans we had to Fees, we used to say, down to loan sharks, which is NSFAS, and there was a section, a small clique of people who were saying, but why are you guys striking? Trying to delegitimize our strike to say, but guys, there's NSFAS, but you say you repay this thing, you repay it with interest as well, so we want free education. Well, the ANC speaks about this free education. If you look into their conference resolutions, it's there. One of the last conferences, the 2017 one, also it has a clause of free education, but it has never been realized. And I think when you're dealing, like we said before earlier, when you're dealing with students, you are not dealing with illiterate people. People who are not politically conscious. They might not be active, but they're conscious in themselves. So that's how we understood this thing, that okay, here we're dealing with a historical struggle, which is continuing. And we felt that we're not being taken serious by government, because most of us, myself actually, one of my personal reflection, it was a very tough year for me in this sense, was previously in the SRC, we took up very unpopular struggles, which we're not going to talk about here, and that had an adverse effect on me, which I can also link with the Fees struggle. Yeah, we are dealing with the system, we are challenging the system, the status quo of the system, we are actually touching the nerve. So the hegemonic forces of the establishment meted us with every force they had. Just like the miners in Marikana, one thing we all had in common with them, we had a specific goal which was legitimate. They said we want a living wage. They were killed for that. And we said to ourselves, we used to say, if people were killed for wages, we would be killed to have free education. We were not afraid to die, So I think that for us, we drew a lot of inspiration. And the one thing I actually wanted to touch on is how we were criminalized. who were demonized and criminalized by agents of the system, who some of them were students, by the way. But we'll get to that and talk at length about that, To say someone is an agent does not necessarily mean they were a spy, but they have views, they were counter-hegemonic to the movement at the time, to say, this thing has third forces and whatnot. Just like they said in Marikana, no, this thing is criminal.
Yeah.
People died.
It's not
as an effect of that, people died.
And they made the stupid comparison between minors carrying pangas and police carrying guns.
And that 10 people had died before, and therefore 34 people must die. Actually, it was actually not 34, it was other people had died before that day.
Exactly.
So for us, our understanding of how the system operates and how vicious it is and how parasitic it is, we knew whether or not we strike for 1 day or 2 days. The university, the government in itself, because the university is an extension of government. It's government. We were going to get what was coming because we had challenged something so much that, because I always say that FeesMustFall was I think the next biggest thing after 1976. I still hold that view personally. That's how big it is. Even now, government is, we haven't reached free education yet, but
there's, the sort of acknowledging it.
There's never been such a moment in the higher institutions of learning since 1994. There's never been such a moment, and I think that moment for me is personally, I think it was a moment which I was proud to be part of.
Yeah.
And as much as it was not planned, Yeah. But I hope we touch on how I actually became part of Fees, I think something I would also like to share,
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be.
And how did you actually become part of FeesMustFall? Because my understanding of yourself, you're a product of the student movement. You have led in the SRC twice, not 2 times, twice. So you have led there, and you had taken the conscious decision to focus on your academics, allow space for fresh blood to lead, don't want to be imposing yourself, but you found yourself leading the most complicated, the most complex movement, because we called it a movement, But what was your experience?
I think for me it's as complicated, because it's as complicated as I think you put how the year was, because the year was complicated in this sense. I had many conversations with my mother at the time, about because my mother is my original political force.
Yes.
So me and Mamsugwini had these conversations about. But you've contributed, you've never had a holiday, since second year, since you started leading PASMA as an organizer.
Yes.
You now need to start, not that you have to have holidays, but you need to start focusing on school and stuff like that. Not that I was completely failing or whatever. I had failed a year, somewhere, within my schooling, and it was, I think, because I had just because I had met my true purpose, and my true purpose is for me. Social injustice is something that doesn't sit well with me.
Sure.
It's something that just, it doesn't, if things are not right, they're not right, and I want to be able to say it. So I felt that PASMA was a way, an intellectual expression, against this, these problematic things. So in that year, like you said correctly, I decided, because interestingly, now our deputy president of the SRC, after PASMA had lost the election, but we had 2 people out of the
Yes.
Me and Professor Mapende, a very strategic force of ours. So me and Professor were in the SRC, but then because SASCO, and I think it was because SASCO, I had close people in SASCO who were close to me. The same relationship that I have with you, that I have with Mangi, that I have with people like Chantel, people within, because we all understood each other as people who are leading in spaces who are important for the student voice.
Yes.
And so comrades came to my room, and I remember I think it was Kenja, and I came to my room with a couple of other comrades, and then they offered, that look, are you going to? This is what we're offering you. You could either be community engagement or whatever, but we think that your capacity
definitely
will give you deputy president. We know you haven't won elections, but we think your capacity is something we can't look against. So I took that very gratefully because I had run to be president of the SRC. It was my real, dream to be able to lead, a dream that unfortunately had to live. But then what happened was, at the end of that year, I said, okay, because I was in the SRC, I was in my honors year, I said, okay, I'm going to focus on my master's, take the academic thing forward, take a young break, and my intentions were to lead BASMA nationally.
Yes, I remember.
So there was a campaign called Rosalute. We are Rosalute at the time. I really enjoyed it. It never came to fruition, but it was one of the biggest lessons that I had in my life. So at that time, I thought, National Office of BASMA, let me take that and lead the student movement, the branch dynamics to younger people, and just be there as a soundboard. And because FeesMustFall came straight after elections at UWC, if you can remember.
Definitely.
So in the end, the guy is that, what deployment? With deployment, comrades tried to convince me, Comrade Rosa, please avail yourself to be president-elect again, because we think this time around we can push over the line. I said, no, man, give younger comrades a chance. I think I gave Comrade Blake at the time.
Yes.
Give younger comrades a chance. Comrade Blake can take us forward in this process. Comrade Blake took. Yes, we lost elections, and BASMA was really disgruntled about the way in which we lost elections. It felt, if you lose elections, you never can find it, especially if you feel you've worked hard, whether it's objective or subjective. So what then happened, which is going to lead me to the next question I want to ask you to unpack for the viewers. What then happened was that I was an ELC member, and ELC member is the election liaison, part of the election liaison committee, so you run the campaign. So it was me and two strategic forces of BASMA. Comrade Kanya Swana and Comrade Sihle Masika. People of my forces of my generation, people who were very, who were the blood and soul of that branch. And so the three of us ran that campaign. And what happened was we didn't win elections, I think, yes. But we were in the front line because the candidates can't be in the front line as our things go. So we were in the front line leading the campaign. So after the fact, then FeesMustFall happened. FeesMustFall happened elsewhere. I remember there was a meeting that was called, and at that time I was the interim chair of BASMA. Me and Bagani were co-chairing of BASMA. So there was a meeting that the SRC called. Now imagine, I am part of the SRC at the time. I just reported out as the president. Kone was elected the president.
The president, yes.
So now I go represent BASMA now, because as the co-chair, me and Bagani. In the meeting, and there were church structures everywhere, I do encourage in the meeting. See, I say, comrades, this is not the thing about the SRC. Look at other places. Look at VITS. Look at, this is not an SRC thing.
Leading institutions
at the time. So I said, comrades, let's look at that example. Not to say the SRC is not going to be there. No, Bendulo is there. But she's not holding the process herself. She's there allowing other comrades to be there as well, But comrades then, the context, and I think I can understand, comrades then thought, no, Rosa's trying to lead from the grave because Rosa wanted to be lost elections. And they thought that I internally lost deployment within the organization. I decided. So I do feel in retrospect that because I do have personal relations with those comrades those relations were severed at that time. They were bad, because comrades really thought, no, Rosa. What made it worse, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, what made it worse was that MC wasn't in the political landscape at UWC anymore at the time. He had a similar situation. He had moved out, completely to say, give the younger comrades a chance. And I remember specifically, we were shutting down at Steel Park, and when we were shutting down, someone, MC came through and asked me, Yemchan, what is going on here? And you could see in his eyes, when a child sees sweets and they just want to you could see in his eyes, he was asking, Chief, I want to get involved, what's going on, because that is the natural instinct I saw from you. So what from there, how did it,
I think from me, I think what is important was, there was also, I think, after the meeting you're talking about, there was starting to be a momentum whereby students started associating the SRC with the establishment. And they started now rejecting the SRC because I stayed off campus. So when I got onto campus, luckily I decided, let me put on my regalia for once. Put on my organizational t my youth league t-shirt, and then I walked over, wore shorts because I knew there's a program. They let me wear my shorts and my all-stars, and then I went. And I get there, you know, there was a lady who was the deputy president of the SRC, something which, you know, then the SRCs was having quarrels, they're supposed to go to parliament or something. I remember and then this corporate says to the SG, hey chief, you can't tell me anything. I'm the DP. We're now relax and whatnot. Then from there, I took a chunk of students and then went across and then we find comrades. I said, comrades, no man, and you comrades were already shutting. I said, no man, we also have people here. Let's move. Then that's how we moved, and then we successfully. I think that time we would still successfully shut.
We shut it down.
We shut the campus within 30 minutes. And then that's how it actually started. But the previous, I'm thinking a couple of nights before, you know, this thing has been bothering me because I've been watching it, and you know, I felt like, what is it that I'm doing about such a situation? I mean, this is a historic moment, and I'm sitting in my room. I was excluded financially, academically. You know, I just got in because we knew how to, you know, maneuver the system. So I managed to get in back into the system.
On behalf of people.
So, you know, for me, and I also, you know, one of those agreements where, hey, chief, you back, but you must stop your nonsense.
Yeah, please.
And then I just said, no, anyways, I'm not interested anymore, man. And, you know, I felt like the university was becoming younger. And, you know, I felt like I don't want to be imposing myself, you know, you senior comrades and all that. And I just left it like that. So I said to these comrades of mine, I don't mind and them, you know, I went to campus, it was late at night, found them in this room, Chris Ramirez. I said, gents, you are currently active. What are you comrades doing about this thing? The country is burning. Those are the words I use. The country is burning. UWC is quiet. And remember, we can never forget UWC's contribution to the liberation struggle. You know, UWC was a very engaged institution. Hence, but I always say it's a former of the left, you know, because so as I said, comrades, you can't do this thing. I mean, you need to, you know, and then luckily you can do comrades on the other side already, you know. Hence, sometimes they say, you know, revolutionaries think alike, you know. So that's how actually our minds met at that moment, because, you know, I knew you and I knew your role and your contribution in the student movement. So I knew, man, here's someone that I relate to, you know, and he's leading here alone, and it's quite a mass of people that is leading alone, you know. Then from there, you welcomed me, and then we just moved like that.
Yeah, and speaking on the question of leadership, because the spontaneity is the spontaneity of, just to bring you guys into it again, the spontaneity of the leadership group. Because you see, there's this myth that has gone around for a while, particularly around movements, social movements of a FeesMustFall kind of nature, is that there is no leadership. You know, no one. There is no leadership, which is not necessarily just not true only, but its implications are not only on the matter of fact or fiction. The implications are broader than that. They are in the sense that a movement without any coordination, any structural sort of leadership moving it forward,
conventional kind of leadership, there's an elected body
and that kind of thing. FeesMustFall, more social movements of FeesMustFall is like went against the grain about what it meant to be a leader of a movement. Now people were leading the movement vastly, so there were leaders in the movement. There were leaders at every level. If you wanted to understand what the finances of the movement, to make sure that protesters were eating, you had to speak to Akon, who was a person, interestingly at the time, there was people in the movement who never were involved in activism before. But the movement just brought people alive, and that was why I think it was a historically important movement. But I want to speak on the spontaneity of leadership by saying, even though the leadership was spontaneous, but the moment required, or the moment called upon people, leadership, because we were prepared, I mean, ourselves. If you speak about Azania Opazmo, the former president of the SRC, if you speak about people like Monde Nonabe, if you speak about people at UWC, like Mangi Nombula, the current chairperson of SASP in the province, we speak about Mhlolo Marx, we speak about Asanda Blake at the time, we speak about
non-academic staff,
Chantel that were there, So it was because people who just had a problem with injustice, just couldn't stand aside. And so the spontaneity was there, but it was, please forgive this contradiction, it was an orderly spontaneity.
Yeah.
In that everyone understood that, okay, there's what needs to happen, but naturally people gravitated towards where they could lead the process within, because the movement was dynamic. The movement had political education, the movement had resource mobilization, the movement had vision, cultivation. The movement had an array of areas, but the spontaneity question was an unprecedented spontaneity in the sense that it was very orderly, that spontaneity. Yeah. We managed, Pastor Skosana used to encourage us, between order and chaos. We were always between order and chaos, And Pastor Skosana was an intriguing guy.
It was a force. It was a force to be reckoned with.
A serious force to be reckoned with.
And how it said how the system dealt with Pastor Skosana, because of Afrocentric views and radical views.
Very strong. He was non-compromised, unrelenting.
But on the question is spontaneity, I think for me, one thing that I was comfortable with, and one thing we quickly picked up that, this is not your orthodox kind of student movement that we came from. Structural, So we knew that here you are dealing with it's a different animal, because you'll be addressing the meeting and then you'll be told, as the masses, this is what we're saying. But I think the most difficult question for me at a leadership level was a question of the way forward. I think you also said it.
They will even call it the way forward.
I think for me that you will be given a mandate that, look, we are giving you this mandate because we trust your abilities and capabilities as a leader, because we have seen you in the institution, we know you, we trust you. We trust your ability to lead, but and again, the movement, just evolved. It was so dynamic.
Yes.
It evolved to a sense that we started having paranoias, which I think we must talk about this.
I think you lead us quite into two discussions before we sort of wrap up the discussion. Two important ones that I think. The first, the question of trust, and the question of paranoia, which is surveillance on the movement. There was a huge element of distrust. Want to bring the viewers in again. Want you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Please engage us. Please forgive us for probably the bad editing or all the other things we are comment, please.
Comments are very important. Subscribe,
please. Very important, so that we can continue to be able to give you. And I think as the show and the channel grows more mature, we will improve in any other things. And please drop in the comment section what we can do better and what other ideas that you have.